like, look, if that doesn't work, take the bottom up approach, right? Optimize the hormones and let them regulate neurotransmitters. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ryan, and this is the Thunder Channel. On nootropics, on testosterone, and on male performance, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified of all future content, because I pump out some of the most detailed scientific content around nootropics, biohacking, and testosterone on the internet. Please like the video. I would love for you to just hit the like button. I know people tell you that all the time, but honestly, guys, it makes a huge difference. So if you're watching this and you're not hitting the like button, just fucking click it, dude. Also wanted to mention that the Torque Nootropic Stack is on discount again. It is 25% off. The coupon code for that is 25TORQ, and you can get that in the description or at livecortex.com. I'll explain all the stacks and stuff later, but right now, 25% off the Torque Stack. All right, so what I want to do is I want to address something that I guess is somewhat common in the, well, I don't want to call it common, right? But it is something that people have reported and people have been complaining about relative to cannabis, pot, marijuana, and derealization, depersonalization, as well as ANHEDONIA. We're going to kind of talk about some of those negative effects that may come about after either a large amount of ingested cannabis, whether you've dosed like an edible that you're not used to dosing, right? It's obviously is going to metabolize different. A lot of people that this happens to, especially the ANHEDONIA, like they may have been smoking pot for years, right? It's just like didn't really bother them in any negative way. And then one day, whether it was a bolus dose or something, then they ended up with ANHEDONIA and derealization. And I want to say, like, I'm not anti-pot or pro-pot. I've smoked a lot of pot in my day, to be perfectly honest with you. That out of the way, let's talk about some of the neurological cascades that are taking place and what might explain this situation, as well as my suggestion on how to get out of it. So firstly, ANHEDONIA is characterized by or defined by a complete lack of emotion, right? Things that would otherwise give you joy or used to give you joy do not give you joy anymore. You're sort of on this like very even level plane of emotion where you don't feel terrible, you don't feel bad, you're largely apathetic to everything. It's not a fun place to be. I've actually induced ANHEDONIA via experimentation of all the stuff that I've experimented with over the years. I won't get into the exact ingredient because there was actually a lot of stuff in the picture, and it was not fun. It was a week and a half or so of complete apathy for literally everything that I eventually, resolved. Anyway, I'm going to take you to a paper called Use of Marijuana, Effect on Brain Health, a scientific statement from the American Heart Association. This paper, it goes, from the mechanistic standpoint, THC activates cannabinoid receptors in the brain, thus interfering with physiological actions of endocannabinoids. Now look, the endocannabinoids, like you have them innately in your nervous system and throughout your body. The endocannabinoid system is I'll just read this, I think it's a Wikipedia blurb. It goes, the endocannabinoid system is a biological system composed of endocannabinoids, which are endogenous lipid-based retrograde neurotransmitters that bind to cannabinoid receptors and cannabinoid receptor proteins that are expressed throughout the vertebrae, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. But it's important to understand like what the endocannabinoids and that whole system are actually responsible for. Primarily, they influence neuronal synaptic communication and affect biological functions, including eating, anxiety, learning and memory, reproduction, metabolism, growth, and development via an array of actions throughout the nervous system. The thing I want you to take away here is neuronal synaptic communication, okay? Right away, I mean, this may be partially responsible for what may be a slowed cognition when you're under the influence of marijuana. You've got a disruption in the endocannabinoid system via THC, and that's fussing with synaptic function in your brain. Now, like impaired synaptic function, what that translates to, what that means is an impaired ability to transmit impulses between neurons, right? I mean, that's essentially the basis for how your brain is communicating and how you're verbally fluent, or you can engage in reference memory and use your brain throughout the course of an instance or the day. Now, this stuff gets a little wishy-washy, but just to give you an idea of how much of a strong effect cannabis has on neuronal function, I'm going to read you another paragraph from this paper. It goes, although incompletely understood, the way in which THC disrupts memory and learning may be through its differential effect on neurotransmitter release and binding to CB1 receptors. For example, THC activates CB1 receptors located on GABAergic interneurons, which represent nearly 3/4 of the brain's CB1 receptors and astrocytes, resulting in the release of hippocampal glutamate. Also, THC affects the neurotransmission of other neurotransmitters involved in the modulation of memory, such as acetylcholine, adenosine, and serotonin. Furthermore, THC activation, where are we? We're right here, of CB1 receptors present on mitochondria leads to decreased cellular respiration and ATP supply. ATP is a fundamental in maintaining and regulating neurotransmission, and its reduction might contribute to THC-induced cognitive effects. I can tell you, having suffered from mitochondrial issues, it's not something that you want to do. Back when I had mono, it was Epstein-Barr virus, and then which caused mono, I had to deal with mitochondrial restoration. Like I had to actually fix my mitochondria post that kind of post-fatigue illness, and it was not fucking fun. To say that, that it just all depends on your genetic profile, man, and how healthy you are generally and what else you're doing to optimize mitochondria. I mean, if you're taking Glynac all the time, which is uber hefty for positively modulating mitochondria, I really don't think you're going to run into that significant of a problem, or it won't be like a major concern. I mean, if you're somebody that's got some sort of ATP issue, you're like generally fatigued all the time. I mean, I think pot is good and bad, right? I just think it's like booze. It's not the thing to be ingesting if your physiology is in some sort of impaired state. Okay, so you have disruption of the endogenous kind of endocannabinoid system, which means impairment of synaptic plasticity, which is going to mean less power of nerve impulses transmitting between neurons, which is the basis for how you think and send signals. And you have the negative effect of transmission on acetylcholineadenosine and serotonin. Now, what I also think is relevant here, you got to keep in mind that this is an adolescent. So these are people that's brains are growing. Once you get past a certain point, though you still engage in neuroplasticity, and your brain can still grow. I mean, that's something we learned in the 1990s. Was a doctor named Eric Kandel who discovered neuroplasticity. So now we know it's like intelligence isn't fixed. Like none of this stuff is fixed. You can always get smarter. You can always grow your brain, but you're growing it significantly in the teenage years. And in this time, accordingly, long-term THC exposure during adolescence may disrupt dynamic changes occurring in glutamatergic and GABAergic systems, leading to excessive synaptic pruning, i.e. a loss of synaptic contacts, long-term dysfunction in prefrontal cortex, excitatory and inhibitory balance, and desynchronization of the prefrontal cortex neuronal networks, which also dysregulate the mesolimbic dopaminergic pathway. I think as it relates to depersonalization, you're going to want to look at acetylcholine and see if that is awry in any way, but largely, especially as it relates to anhedonia, you're going to want to look at essentially the entire limbic system. I wouldn't even couch it as just the mesocortical limbic system, the entirety of the limbic system. Now, the limbic system and the temporal lobes particularly are heavily involved, to a lesser extent the amygdala, in your arousal, your sexual response. I mean, neurotransmitters mediate that, but those parts of the brain, if they're somehow desynchronized and not connected to other parts of your brain, and then, spinal cord and nerve signals that transmit through the pudendal nerve and then the dorsal nerve of your penis. This is where like sexual dysfunction comes into play, which kind of goes hand in hand sometimes with anhedonia. But back to the dopaminergic pathways and the general limbic system impairment that is probably taking place in these scenarios where you've got anhedonia from cannabis use and potentially anhedonia from other stuff. There are some nootropic chemicals that will increase dopamine concentrations in the mesocortical limbic areas. Acetyl L-carnitine is one of them. Acetyl L-carnitine would be one of them. If you dose Alcar and you dose it semi-consistently, you may achieve some sort of resolution or at least a temporary alleviation of your anhedonic symptoms via having this extra dopamine release in the cortical limbic areas. So that'd be my first suggestion. 400 to 800 milligrams of acetyl L-carnitine. Like, take everything else out of your regimen. Just bring some Alcar in and see if that helps. In addition to that, you're probably going to want to upregulate the gene expression that fosters dopaminergic neuron generation. Like, it can't hurt, right? You're going to want to try to optimize dopamine in every way possible. And the only real way to do that is to take 9-methyl-beta-carboline. Okay, 9-MEBC is a research chemical that was studied for Parkinson's, is still being studied for Parkinson's, and shows some promise in that arena, and has some very positive anecdotals with people on the web taking it for restoration of the dopaminergic pathways and generally getting their mood back. Also tends to resensitize people's responses to their stimulants, so keep that in mind. At the same time, bromontane, right? Bromontane will help you to synthesize more dopamine from precursor. So if you're getting tyrosine in your diet, which you probably are, you don't really have to be all that conscious of it, but if you're in this situation, maybe take some some actual tyrosine. Bromotain is going to help take tyrosine and convert it into usable dopamine, which is going to be useful for anyone with anhedonia, no question. Right? So you got Alcar, potential use of Alcar, 9-methylbeta-carboline, and bromotain. The other thing that I always would suggest anyone who's dealing with anhedonia to do is treat it with hormones, right? This would be a bottom-up approach, not taking the top-down approach with just fussing with neurotransmitters, but trying to modulate neurotransmitters from the bottom up, from the hormonal system up. Look, there are countless papers on how testosterone itself, and really in the context of TRT, but I'd wager you'd get positive benefits by just raising your own endogenous testosterone, aiding in either dopamine synthesis, dopamine release, or both. There's a paper here titled Testosterone Regulation of Sex Steroid-Related mRNAs and Dopamine-Related mRNAs in Adolescent Male Rat Substantia nigra. I'll point to the results section here where they say that we found ERA, which is a type of estrogen receptor, and AR, that's an androgen receptor. I mean, that's what DHT ultimately binds to, which is going to get converted to from testosterone, in midbrain dopamine neurons in adolescent male rats, indicating that dopamine neurons are poised to respond to circulating sex steroids. We have seen this. There are countless anecdotals. I talked about this with Vigorous Steve recently, how like going on TRT, like for me, when I started, I was like, yeah, I'm certainly more motivated than normal. I need less dopaminergic, less energy like nootropics, because the testosterone is interacting with neurotransmitters in a way which seemingly is giving me more dopamine. They go, we also report that androgens, testosterone and ultimately DHT, increase TH protein. Okay, TH is tyrosine hydroxylase, and that is a dopamine synthesis enzyme. So when I say that testosterone increases dopamine synthesis, this is what I'm talking about. Tyrosine hydroxylase upregulation. That is a very critically important enzyme for the synthesis of dopamine. So what does this mean? Yeah, does it mean go on TRT? Not necessarily, right? I think that would be beneficial for a lot of people that are in endless anhedonia and can't find a way out, assuming that you've run the top-down approach of just targeting dopamine from the neurotransmitter side using research chemicals and drugs. Look, if that doesn't work, take the bottom-up approach, right? Optimize the hormones and let them regulate neurotransmitters. This is purely anecdotal, but I have seen in many cases with clients with really weird conditions where we couldn't affect the neurotransmitters consistently with this top-down approach of trying to modulate neurotransmitters with research chemicals that affect dopamine, etc., that we were able to stabilize the neurological problems they were having from the bottom-up approach in using hormones and predominantly TRT, a highly tailored, perfectly dialed in HRT or hormone replacement therapy protocol. And by the way, look, if you have high testosterone or normal testosterone in these kind of situations, it rarely means anything significant, right? There's a big difference between how you're going to feel and function and how the neurotransmitter cascades, particularly dopamine synthesis, is going to function at 600 nanograms per deciliter total test, middle or low end of the reference range free test, compared to 950 nanograms per deciliter total test, and on the high end of the reference range of free testosterone. It is just not the same thing, just because of normal levels doesn't really mean a whole lot, especially when you're trying to repair something, right? You want to go as high as possible to where you still feel good and you don't have many side effects. Now, obviously, bringing testosterone in replacement therapy into the picture is going to change things in a way which is going to make you have to manage estrogen as well. Now, estrogen is good to a certain point and can help sensitize serotonin receptors, which may help people that have anhedonia as well. But, you know, there's just a very fine line there of diminishing returns, or where it kind of gets wonky when estrogen gets past a certain threshold for most guys. So if you're going to go on TRT in this case, you're going to have to manage estrogen, right? Because your testosterone, some of it, via the aromatization of that testosterone, is going to turn into serum E2 or estradiol. All right, now this is perhaps a little controversial. No, actually, I wouldn't call it controversial because the literature is actually very clear on this, and I've been studying meditation for like 17 years or something, but it is a little woo-woo. But I do want you to consider particular types of meditation that may target temporal lobe function. General limbic system function, okay, but specifically temporal lobe function. This is a paper on meditation and how it's affecting particular regions of the brain, and there's a couple really important things that I want to show you here. They go, the left superior temporal gyrus and a small region in the fundus of the central sulcus showed a trend towards a significantly thicker cortex in meditation participants than in controls. And as an anecdotal, I guess a little less scientific suggestion here, look, if you YouTube something like temporal lobe binaural beats, these are beats that are put together with very specific instruments and very particular frequencies that are meant to stimulate certain areas of your brain. This stuff actually does work. This is part of how I recovered from my experiment gone wrong, and this is about 1.5 years ago, which induced anhedonia again for about 1.5 weeks, and it wasn't fun. But, you know, in addition to 9-MeBC, I wasn't on TRT back then, so I did try to optimize testosterone. I brought in binaural beats that target the temporal lobe. Listen, when you listen to those in headphones, preferably, you got to kind of actually put a little effort in to both listen to them as well as clear your brain. When you get into that place where you're almost doing attention but without paying attention to anything, like you're not paying attention to anything specific, but your brain is sort of like still, it's very still. It's just like you've got some sort of clench on your brain preventing you from thinking about fucking the next Friends episode or whatever the hell you're into. You do that for long enough, 25 minutes a night, very consistently, yeah, look, you are more than likely going to rewire connectivity between some of these regions of the brain that are responsible for making you feel things and have positive emotion. Again, I know it sounds woo-woo, but the literature is actually very clear. Meditation changes the brain positively. You're going to want more thickness in the areas that are responsible for your emotion, for your sexual function. And the limbic system and the temporal lobes are a great place to go. At the same time, you are going to want to obviously remove any cannabis that is in the picture, and you're going to want to remove anything that's psychoactive or neuroactive that isn't very targeted in trying to resolve your issue. Again, if you're using 9-methylbeta-carboline, bromontane, and Alcar, either by themselves as a protocol or with TRT, that's targeted, right? But if you're taking inositol and you've maybe got some ginkgo in there for blood flow and whatever, like you're just throwing a bunch of things at it that aren't necessarily targeted, get them out of the regimen as soon as you can. You don't need other things in there that are potentially making things worse via, I don't know, potential downregulation of dopamine receptors or some sort of increase in serotonin, which is going to be somewhat inhibitory on dopamine. Obviously, you don't want to have pot in the picture, right? You may be to the point where you're relying on it and a little bit of pot helps you kind of maybe feel like you have some emotion again. Forget about that. You're going to want to resolve the issue, and all that's going to do is keep kicking the fucking can down the road. All right, so take heed to those suggestions. Get some Alcar, some bromontane, some 9-MeBC. See if that works. If it doesn't, consider raising your endogenous testosterone if you don't want to go on TRT. Otherwise, you probably just bite the bullet if you're really dealing with hardcore anhedonia and get on TRT. Get your hormones in the right place. Get on the top end of the reference range of total test, top end of the reference range free test. Control your estrogen. Don't let it go wild. And let that bottom-up approach do its work on increasing dopamine synthesis as well as general dopamine signaling. And please do some meditation, okay? Get some binaural beats, put on some headphones, 25-30 minutes a night, and just take the fucking time and have the discipline to goddamn do it. Trying to give you tough love here because it's actually important. I've been in states in my life, whether it was anxiety from one thing or the other, or just some terrible thing happened or otherwise, where I've relied on binaural beats, temporal lobe activation, prefrontal cortex activation, meditations or beats specifically that target those areas of the brain, actually being connected with myself and going internally. The more you're sitting here thinking and being external to connected to yourself, the less resolution of your anhedonia you're going to have, I can tell you that much. As I mentioned in the beginning, yep, the Torque stack right now is 25% off. Look, if you want a powerful, no-holds-bar, energy-inducing nootropic stack, go buy Torque. The stuff is amazing. You can get it at livecortex.com. If you're not convinced that this is one of the best stacks you can take, go read the reviews, man. They are all over the website. We've got featured reviews. We got reviews that were posted on YouTube. Like, how much more real can you get with actual real users going, hey, this stuff is awesome. Again, the coupon code is 25TORQUE, and that will take 25% off of what's probably the most purchased nootropic stack on the web right now. You need to hire me to help you to get over like your cannabis-induced depersonalization, derealization, or anhedonia, general anhedonia aside from that, or caused by other things, and hosts of other areas of expertise. You can check out everything that I do on the consultations tab on the menu livecortex.com. We usually get on calls if we're doing calls within 24 hours. Emails are a lot sooner as well. And again, you can book me in under a minute or so at livecortex.com. All right, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you guys. Appreciate the fact that you watched. If we're still here, hit the like button. Again, it really actually matters. Looking through the analytics on YouTube, it's like I've got a certain percentage of people that are here that aren't subscribed that are watching the video. So if you're not, hey, please hit the sub button. I would love to have you here because I pump out scientifically accurate, scientifically backed, valid content that is useful for many people regarding a lot of different things related to nootropics, hosts of other things. I hope you enjoy our content. All right, everybody. Ciao.